So I want to continue to experiment with some of the scripts that I've provided, and I just want to draw your attention to, I was playing with the console a little bit earlier, and that was just giving me a report on some of the errors that my scripts were generating. And so if you were experimenting with the scripting and selecting console errors, I just want to point out that you may be focused on the console tab in Unity, and I want to click back on my project tab in order to reveal the project folder contents. So just be aware that if you were getting some errors and you double clicked on those errors inside Unity, it might have brought focus to the console window. So I'm back inside my project folder. I'm looking inside my assets, inside my Marble scripts. Now the next script that I want to take a look at is this Force2 script, and the Force2 script works a little bit different than the Force1 script. And in fact, if I just click on Force2, I can get a real quick preview of what that script is, and so I can remind myself what's happening inside this script. If I want to modify the script, of course, I can double click on it. It opens up in MonoDevelop, and now I can modify the script. And with just a quick look at this script, there are a couple things that are happening here. There's a few comments at the top of the screen, or top of the script, and in fact, I've commented a little bit of functionality out that we can turn on later, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. There's a public variable here, or a variable that we can declare inside Unity. So whenever you see the var command, that means that there's a variable being declared, and I've called this the force that has a value of 20. We'll see that come back around again soon. There's also a reference to a camera in here, or in fact a main camera. And now if you look at this script, it's a little bit less complicated than the previous script in some ways, in that there's only one input control. There's the fire 1 button, and instead of driving a force according to a global axis, this is actually a relative axis that references the camera direction. Okay, so this script's a little bit different, and there's a slightly different process of applying this script. I'm going to jump back to Unity. I'm going to go back and select my sphere, and if you remember, if I select my sphere, I can go over here and look at the script, or I can look at the components of the sphere, and that shows me all of the scripts that have been applied. I have this Force1 script, and I got a couple different choices. I can actually click on this cog to remove that component. That will remove the script. Or I can just uncheck Force1 script. That will deactivate that script that's been attached to it. So again, if I uncheck the Force1 script as a component, that script is no longer active. So if I run my simulation and I mash on the AWSD keys, or I click the fire button or the mouse 1 button, nothing is happening here. It's because that script has been deactivated. If I turn it back on and I hit the play button, now my functionality has returned. That's a valuable thing for having two different scripts attached to an object and toggling the scripts dynamically inside the game scene. So maybe you have one control scheme for your marble that does one thing in one kind of environment, and then if you trigger an event, you could switch to a different control scheme. Okay, so maybe you encounter some kind of power up along the way with your marble game, and you temporarily want to turn on the ability to fly, or increase the speed of the force that's being applied to your marble. These are things that you can do by either influencing different variables or turning on and turning off scripts dynamically. Now for the sake of this demo, I just actually want to get rid of the Force 1. I want to remove that component. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to apply Force 2 to my sphere. So I'll just click, drag, and drop on my sphere. Now when I select the sphere, if I were just to look at these values, there's the force variable, and there's a value of 20 here. Now what I've done is I've created a variable. If you remember, and I'll just throw this Force1 script back, well actually I'll just double click the Force1 script. If we look at the Force1 script, we're adding a force to a given axis based on a hard number here. So we're saying when you click the fire button, apply a force that in this case is 25, because we hardwired that number into the code, so that when we click the mouse button along the y-axis, we're getting a force value of 25. Let me close the Force1 script. In the Force2 script, what we're saying is, instead of applying the hard value of 25, what we're saying is apply this variable value to an axis. So if I go back to the force and I say something like, okay, I don't want this to be a hard value, something that's declared inside inside my y value of my fire1 function here. You can see here that I've declared a variable called var the force equals 20. If I just borrow this real quick, I'll just copy that and I'll go into the force script, and at the top of the script I'll just paste that. So now I have this variable called the force, and it's equal to 20. What I can do now is, instead of saying 25, I can say the force. So now when I hit the fire button, it's applying a positive y force to whatever this value is. In this case, it's 20. Okay, let me just save this really quickly, and I'll backtrack, jump into Unity here, and let me just redo this. Let me turn off force 2. I'll drag and drop force 1. So now inside force 1, because we've declared a variable, I'll get that out, a variable inside the script, we now have access to that variable. Okay, so when I hit the play button and I now hit the fire button, I'm applying a force that's equivalent to this variable, the force, every time I hit the fire button. Now, if I want to dynamically influence that, I can say, well, I don't want the force to equal 20, even though that's what it's declared as. What if I make it 50? So I'll type in 50, and I'll hit the play button. So now when I hit the fire button, I have a lot more power. I have a lot more force being applied to my sphere. Okay, so this is now being working off of a variable. The benefit of working off of variables is that these are dynamic and they can change depending on... there's really two advantages. One, we can actually see what this variable is without having to go into the script and hardwire it. Okay. Second is that these can become dynamic, and depending on the interactions we have in our environment, we can actually influence those variables. Okay, so let me just get back on track here. I want to get rid of the force 1 script. I want to turn back on the force 2 script. Now I have force 2 attached to my sphere. Now you'll see that when nothing happens really when it comes to my script. When I hit the fire button, I'm actually just pushing my sphere off the edge, and I don't really have any control over it. And that is because if I look at the force 2 script, what's happening is that the force is being applied essentially in the direction that the camera is facing. Okay, so my camera is looking down the z-axis, and so the functionality of this script currently is that when I hit the play button and I press the mouse button, I'm actually pushing it away from the camera. So I'm pushing it in the direction that I'm looking. And this is, you know, kind of a very powerful thing, because if we modify this camera to follow the sphere and to change its orbit based on our mouse input, then we can start to orbit around the sphere and kind of push it along depending on the direction that we're looking at. And we'll do that in the next presentation.